Hey everybody, it's Lavender Town, and today I'm going to be testing out 3 free animation programs and deciding which one is the best. But first I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is a website with over 25,000 different classes on the subjects of business, design, illustration, animation, and more. I've been using it to try to learn more about animation and After Effects because After Effects is a program I have had a very tumultuous relationship with ever since art school, and this class has just made it so much more accessible and just a lot easier to approach. If learning a new skill is part of your New Year's resolutions, I highly recommend trying it out. You can get 2 months for free if you're one of the first 500 people to click the link in the description. And if you want to continue on after 2 months, you can get the premium membership for less than $10 a month if you choose their annual plan. Thank you so much to Skillshare for the continued support. So the first free program that I wanted to try is called Pencil 2D, and it pretty much just sells itself as a standard frame-by-frame 2D animation program. It also has some vector capability apparently, but since it usually sells itself as a sort of hand-drawing kind of animation program, I decided to focus mainly on its bitmap tools. Now the first thing I noticed about it is that it looks very simple. It looks a little cheap and like a free program. It doesn't look overly fancy, but that is actually one of its strengths. I feel like as I used it, I just realized that it was very user-friendly. It's not as overwhelming as a lot of other animation programs I'd used. The keyframes you can just click and drag, and the layers that they bring up as a default are also very simple to understand. There's a bitmap layer where you just draw like normal, a vector layer where you can use vectors, and a camera layer where you can move around in the space and do camera movements like that. So I like that element of it quite a bit. I decided on each of these I was going to try to do a ball bounce to test the animation tools, and then I would try to draw one colored character to test its ability to do more illustrative work. Now, right off the bat, I'm going to say that one of the cons of Pencil 2D is that it cannot do like multiply layers. You can't really use your layers in the way that you could use them in Photoshop. So that means if you're going to be shading, all you have to work with is alpha, which is a little different than having a multiply layer. So if you wanted to do color shading or something like that, it's going to be a lot more difficult than it would be in a program that has a more complicated set of blending modes. It also has fairly basic tools as far as it goes, and like I said, that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you're trying to do. I don't think that any of them look especially bad, but they're just very functional, I guess. I was able to do this ball bounce very quickly. It was not hard to figure out. And I gotta say, it's actually pretty nice to animate with. You just use the arrow keys to scroll around on your keyframes. You can choose different levels of looping that you want. And one of the things I appreciate the most is that it's so easy to move around your keyframes. In a lot of even very premium priced animation programs, it's very difficult to move your keyframes around just so that you can add or remove one frame or push things closer or farther apart so that the timing looks a little better on the animation. And so having that functionality really easy is really beneficial. I didn't look at a single tutorial while I was working with Pencil 2D, and I was able to animate just fine. Now, as far as illustrating something a little bit more complicated than a ball, I found it was pretty easy to use. There wasn't too much issue with the pencil tool, and I found it's very responsive with my tablet, which sometimes these free programs can run a little choppy, and when you're drawing really fast it can start to slow down, but I didn't have any problem with that. I used their inking tool and just added another layer so that I could add some ink on top, and I couldn't easily find a way to change the bitmap layer to be lighter, but it wasn't too much of an issue because the pencil was already a bit more transparent, and I do believe that there's a way to do it, but because it wasn't giving me any trouble, I didn't bother looking it up. Another thing that Pencil 2D does, which kind of bothered me, was it constantly asks you if you want to save, which is really good because you don't want to lose animation work. That can be a real killer. But every time that you open a new document or whatever, you have to tell it, do not ask again, if you don't want it to be popping up every 5 minutes. And personally, I really didn't want it to be quite that persistent. I think having an autosave in the background is probably better than that, but it is good that there's something there trying to protect you from losing your work. At this point is when I was trying to add the shading and I just couldn't figure out a way to do it, so unfortunately I couldn't really add it on. It ended up just looking sort of watery and weird on top. You can see that it's not at full opacity, which is good, but it just doesn't look quite right because it's not darkening down the colors underneath, it's just doing a more transparent layer of the color that I picked, so it's really not looking the way that I want it to. So basically, if you wanted to do shading with this program, you'd have to be a little more clever with it and pick every color individually based on the colors underneath it, which would be quite tedious when it comes to animation. Though to be fair, a lot of animations don't do shading layers, even really professional ones, and if they do, it's like very, very sparingly, so maybe that's not as big of an issue for you guys, depending on what you want to animate. I actually kind of like the grittiness of the inking tool. It has almost sort of like a rough pixelated edge a little bit, which I thought I was going to hate when I first started using it, but in the end it actually made it look kind of cool and unique. It's sometimes nice to have things not be totally smooth, especially when you're working with digital. It gives it a bit more tooth and a little bit more of a presence on the page. So to wrap up my review of this program in particular, I would give it probably a 19 out of 24 frames because overall it just really does the job quite well. It is missing some key things that if you wanted to do something more pretty and illustrative in your animation, you're definitely going to miss. And I will say that when I first opened it up, it had a very weird setting on the onion skin, so it like basically wasn't working, and I had to look around to find a way to fix that. But overall, I think this is actually a very strong free program, and I think that you could learn on it for a long time before you would ever feel the need to buy a more expensive one. Next up, I wanted to try Blender's 2D animation program. They've really just come out with this in its current form very recently, and I was excited to try it out. I believe it's called Grease Pencil. And the first things first, you will notice there's a major difference in the way that this program looks. It looks a lot more slick, like a program that you'd have to pay for. However, that also makes it extremely complicated if you've never watched someone use it or looked up a tutorial. It's quite overwhelming. There's just tiny text everywhere and a million little tools, and honestly I found it a little daunting when I first opened it up. Now, for those of you who don't know, Blender has been the sort of forefront of the free 3D modeling programs for a long time. In art school, a lot of people I knew used it because it is so accessible and it's a very good 3D sculpting program. But like I said, this is kind of the first foray that they had into 2D animation. And right off the bat, I was able to figure out the onion skin pretty quickly. There wasn't anything too bad. One of the things that's kind of weird about it is that it has sort of an infinite canvas, and it's also a canvas that you could move in 3D. So if you're not careful, your animation will suddenly be looking like it's at a weird angle and it's in 3D space, sort of hovering in the air. So you have to be a little careful about that. The keyframes are not as easy to move as they were in Pencil 2D, which was super frustrating because there was a point in this animation where I wanted to just move one of the frames over and add another frame because I wanted it to slow down at the peak of the ball's bounce, and I couldn't do that because I kept trying to select the keyframes I wanted to move, and then it would only move one of them, and I really tried to figure it out for a long time, but it was just kind of it was really a nightmare trying to figure out how to do it. I don't know why it's so difficult. I feel like in these programs you should always just be able to sort of shift click the keys that you want and then move them with your mouse, but for some reason that was just not working for me. Another thing that's really strange is it really doesn't look like any kind of drawing program that I've ever seen. Everything's in weird places, and the fill bucket tool does not do what you think it would do. That's one of the things that I noticed right off the bat when I started trying to do more illustrative stuff. But as far as animation goes, it wasn't too horrible picking it up and just trying to work on it. One of the things that's very sad though is it let me close out of this ball bounce without saving, and it didn't even like ask me if I wanted to save, so I lost that ball bounce completely, which is kind of the opposite of Pencil 2D in every way. It has so much more functionality, but it's much harder to use, and it totally doesn't help you not lose your work. I can't believe that I literally just lost that whole animation. The way I lost it was I tried to make a new image, so I was starting to try to draw this character, and I thought that if it was going to put it in a new tab, that would be fine. Like, you know, when you make something new in Photoshop, it just puts the project you were using before into a different tab. Or I thought if it closes it, it'll definitely pop up a little thing to be like, hey, do you want to save this first? But it didn't do either of those things. And in times when I tried to exit out without saving on this drawing, because I wanted to see what it would do in that scenario, it gives you a notification that you haven't saved, but it doesn't let you save it. It's not like, would you like to save this? It's like, are you sure you want to close this? Yes or no, which is also kind of a nitpick, but it's like really weird that it makes you like cancel out of closing it and then you have to save separately. It's I don't know, it's just a weird little thing. Another thing I noticed is that their brush pencil-y tool that I'm using is not at full opacity. It seems to be pressure sensitive opacity, which is really cool if that's what you're going for, but I didn't realize it until I'd already inked this whole thing, and honestly I wasn't a big fan of that, so I wish I'd looked at it a little closer before I had started working on this. My last major gripe about Blender 2D's grease pencil is I could not for the life of me figure out how to fill the colors. I actually looked it up. I tried to look up tutorials. I tried to look up lots of different places. Unfortunately, like I said, because this is such a new program, there actually isn't that much out there to help you learn how to use it. And their fill bucket tool, which you would think would do the thing that it does in every art and animation program ever, would fill in your colors. It just straight up did not do that. It actually adds like a weird little extra line inside the area that it thinks you're trying to color in, and I'm not sure why. So I'm gonna keep working on that and trying to figure out what went wrong here, because I literally could not get it to work, and I think that that's super strange. I actually kind of like the idea of a tool that tries to close any gaps in the line art that you're using, because it seemed like that's what it was trying to do, but yeah, it just didn't. I couldn't figure out a way to color this thing. Last up is a program called Synfig, and it is a vector-based program, so you don't do as much freehanding, you do more like shape-based stuff, and you can do a lot of puppetry with vectors. I found it to be pretty impossible to use without a tutorial. I'm not actually sure what was going wrong. Most of it I kind of was able to figure out just by working through it, but unfortunately this program is very free feeling. I'm not sure how to put it, but it totally crashed on me before I could figure out a way to get it to move. And then when I tried to look up a tutorial to figure out how to fix the problems I was having with the program, it also crashed for the guy whose tutorial I was watching several times. So basically, I don't think it's really ready yet. It might end up getting improved and turn out to be a really good program, but as it is now, it's not really reliable enough to use for animation. So in conclusion, if you're looking for something really easy to pick up and really simple that might have some limited illustration functionalities, I highly recommend Pencil 2D. If you're looking for something that will take a little bit longer to learn but has a lot more that you can do with it, I would recommend Blender's Grease Pencil. And I wouldn't recommend Synfig to anyone because, like I said, I just don't think that it's really ready to use yet. I hope you guys found this helpful. Like I said, I did take up pretty much a beginner first time opening the program approach to each of these, but if you would like, I can research up on them more and learn how to use them really properly, and then do a follow-up video seeing how having more experience with each program changes my opinions with it. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and big thank you to Skillshare for continually supporting the channel. Check out the link in the description if you want a 2-month free trial, and I will see you guys in the next one. A huge thank you to my patrons, including Blep, Ollie, Elizabeth Alvin, La Blah Blah Blah, Cal Pompone, The Artsy Moose, Your Boy SD, JJ Jade, Sergeant Pendulum, Okamore, Micah Dactyl, Hope Chelsom, Rosie Warlock, Dr. Casket, Zoe Stardust, QYTRD, Imagine Creation, Carla Tapia, Midnight Doodles, Clockwork Construct, Cassitarius, and Megan Clare.